Hello, hello, and welcome, beautiful badass. Welcome to episode number 7 of the Magic is in You podcast. I am so excited you're here today to tune in, tap in, and turn on the magic within inside of you. This podcast is designed for badass women who are ready to become the architect of their own life, design, create, and live a life that lights them up from the inside out through self-love, self-trust, and self-confidence. Getting in and owning your badassery so that you can create your wildest dreams into your reality now. My name is Kelsey Holmes, and I am a life and mindset coach empowering badass women entrepreneurs to truly cultivate self-love, self-trust, and self-appreciation, self-belief, so that they can take action and cultivate the life that they have been desiring without self-doubt holding them back. And that's a little bit about what we're going to talk about today, is this overthinking mind. Because like I was just saying, episode number 7, I'm so excited to be here because this is something that I overthought. This podcast, launching this podcast, starting this podcast, that I overthought for years, literally. I even came up with the name over a year before I actually launched this podcast, before I recorded my first episode. I had been wanting to cultivate a podcast for several years before I actually took action and just did the damn thing, sitting in this overwhelm, overthinking. I've got all of these other things. As my coach Nicole says, cat needs a bath excuses. We all have all sorts of things in life that we end up prioritizing over sometimes the things that we truly desire in life, because we're stuck in that overwhelm. We're stuck in that not believing in ourselves enough. We're stuck in the feeling of not good enough, feeling of, I can't do everything all at once, which is sometimes true. We can't do everything all at once. But the great thing is that we can still have this dream, we can still have this desire, and when the time does align, we can take action on it, as long as we're out of the overthinking, overwhelm mind. And like I said, that's kind of what we're going to dive into today, and how we can go from overwhelm and overthinking and into aligned and embodied action towards taking action to get to where we want to go, right? Because with any goal, whether this is, say you want to run a marathon. I'm not a runner, but maybe you want to run a marathon. We'll use that as an example. Maybe you want to run a marathon. The idea of running 26 miles right off the couch is pretty unappealing. So what are you going to do? You're going to train for the marathon. Maybe you start with 1 mile. Maybe you start walking. Maybe you start with whatever it is. You start where you're at, right? You allow yourself to meet yourself where you're at as you're going to train for this marathon, right? And each day you show up for yourself. You get a little bit better. You get a little bit stronger. You build the resilience and continue to go. Before you know it, all of a sudden you're able to fucking crush out a marathon, crush out this epic run that you've been wanting and desiring to create for so long for yourself. Maybe this is a business or relationship example, right? Whatever it is, we get to meet ourselves where we're at and then take baby steps, or for the marathon explanation, we get to take those little runs, those micro runs, and allow them to add up, allow them to compound. We don't need to know the A to Z every step along the way to get to where we want to go. We just need to know the next step. We just need to allow ourselves to take the next step in imperfect action, perfect example right there, and get us to build our resilience, build our strength, build our know-how, right? Get moving. So how do we get out of overwhelm so that we can take action in the first place, right? Because sometimes when we're in that overwhelm, overthinking, it literally holds us hostage. It keeps us, it's almost like a wall preventing us from getting through to where we want to go. As I was prepping for this podcast, I was in my overthinking mind. I wanted to talk about overthinking and overwhelm because so many women that I talk to, so many entrepreneurs that I talk to, that I work with, are in this overwhelm, this overthinking, this place of indecision where they feel stuck. They can't move forward because of this overthinking thing, the overwhelm that they think is going to happen, or because they don't know like 10 steps down the road, and that keeps them stuck in this indecision and this overwhelm and overthinking. And as I was in the process of overthinking this podcast, of how I wanted to share this podcast, because it's still new. It's only episode number 7. I'm still learning. I'm still figuring things out, working kinks out, growing and receiving feedback on the podcast and getting better. And I noticed myself in that like overthinking. What should it be? How should I do it? Down the rabbit hole. Well, instead of allowing myself to continue down the rabbit hole, I took my own advice. What I had wanted to share with you today is how powerful it is for us to, rather than staying in the overthinking and overanalyzing and trying to figure it all out in our head, rather than staying in that head space, that overthinking space, get into the body, get back into the body, tune in, tap in, and really just be in your body, be present in your body. Now, this can look like all sorts of different things. It can look like just taking a deep breath. Like right now, when was the last time today or this week that you took a deep breath? Let's all take a deep breath together right now. Just in through the nose. Pause at the top for a moment. Feel the oxygen, the expansion in your lungs, and let it out through the mouth with a sigh. Allow your shoulders to soften. Allow your jaw to relax. Relax your eyebrows. And boom. That's an embodiment practice right there. That's a somatic practice right there. When we allow ourselves to tap in back into our body, back into the sensations of our body, when we allow ourselves to intentionally relax our jaw, when we allow ourselves to intentionally take a slow, deep, delicious breath, just like that, that allows us to come back to this present moment here and now. I always tell my yoga students, when we focus on the breath, it instantly draws us back into this present moment, because we can never rush forward to the next breath. We can't jump back to the last breath. The only breath that we have is this one right here and right now. And so when we're in our overthinking mind, coming back to the breath is a beautiful way to come back to our body, back to this present moment, and reground ourselves into our body. Another beautiful embodiment practice that we can do when we're in this overthinking, overwhelmed mind is to shake. Literally, physically, like stand up and shake. Now, this could be like just even, for example, this could be a full body shake where you stand up and you shake your entire body. You're like jumping up and down, shaking your head, your arms, your legs, your hips, your shoulders, shaking everything out. This can even be at your desk or even in a meeting. Say you're in a meeting somewhere and you can literally just under the table, just shake your fingers just a little bit, just like you're flicking water off of your fingers. This is actually an energetic technique. And when we flick our fingers like we're flicking water off of our fingers. If you're watching on YouTube, you'll see my fingers flicking around. But if you take all 5 fingertips together on each hand and just like flick, like you're trying to get the water droplets off your hand, that's actually an energetic practice to release stuck, stagnant energy within our body. And so you can even just do this gentle flicking, shaking motion under the table, under a desk, when you're on a Zoom call, when you're in a meeting in person. You can allow yourself these different shaking spectrum, on this different shaking spectrum, whether it's just your fingertips or if it's a full body shake or somewhere in between. Shaking allows us to get back in our body. And I was listening to a super interesting conversation with a neuroscientist recently who was talking about how trauma gets stored in our body, especially when we don't allow ourselves to physically feel the feelings that are happening when we're experiencing trauma. Oftentimes, for example, when we're experiencing trauma, a physical response to trauma is shaking. And when we're shaking, that's actually literally releasing the energy, the trauma that's in our body, out of our body in that moment. So for example, if you think of like dogs, I've got 2 sleeping dogs right here next to me. But if they get into like all riled up and they're wild and crazy outside, whether they're running around together or barking at the neighbors or doing something wild and crazy, after their like excitement time, they oftentimes will shake a little, like they're just shaking the energy off of themselves. You see it with ducks too. Like if a duck is like, you know, if ducks go at each other in the pond and they get into like a little fight, a little bicker kind of thing where they go at each other, when they swim apart from each other, they both shake it off, like they're just releasing what just happened. And this neuroscientist that I was watching the other day was talking about how when we do shake, when we allow ourselves to shake, whether it's during a traumatic event or a post-traumatic event, or maybe it's even just during like traffic, if we're like getting angry in our traffic, when we're talking about trauma, right? It doesn't have to be like it can be something very traumatic, but it can also just be like little things like that feeling of you're going to be late and it feels like you're bringing up this whole thing. If you just allow yourself to shake a little bit, it literally releases that from our body rather than storing it in our body. Because when we don't allow ourselves to feel the feeling, whether it's a traumatic something, whether it's frustration in traffic, whether it is whatever it is, if we don't allow ourselves to feel the feelings that are present with us, they actually get stuck in our body. And shaking is a way that we release that stuck pattern of or emotional pattern within ourselves. Which I just found so fun to hear from a neuroscientist perspective, because I had noticed that shaking really helped me feel better in my body, but also it's just fun to like hear the science behind it, right? I have been in the woo world for over a decade, but prior to that, it took me a while to like actually like lean in, get into the woo world, understand energy. I was very in this like logical brain, needed to know the science behind things. I still remember taking my first Reiki course and we were practicing with tuning forks, and I was like, yeah, but how? Like what's actually happening? Why does it actually work? And the instructor couldn't quite answer it. She was like, I don't know, it just does. It just releases. And that took me so long to wrap my head around the fact that I didn't have to know all of the ins and outs and all of the details behind the how, but I could just understand that it does work and that it does release, it does change how I feel in my body, in my energy, for example, with the tuning fork. But it's still so fun to now hear more science coming out about energy and about different things like emotional release in the body through shaking. To get out of overwhelm, again, and out of overthinking, developing these small somatic or embodiment practices, somatic being of the body, soma, the literal Latin root of soma or somatic, soma is of the body. And so when we're talking about somatic, it really just relates to anything that has to do with the body. And so when we're doing these somatic body movements or embodiment practices, so different movement, tuning in, tapping in practices within ourselves, it allows us to get out of the head and back into the body, back into the present moment when we are focused here and now in our body, just like I was talking about with the breath earlier. When we're focused on this present moment, this present breath, it allows us to bring ourselves back into the present moment in an instant. So there's a ton of different somatic or embodiment practices that you can actually practice for yourself to get out of overthinking, out of indecision, and back into the body, so that when you do come back to the task at hand, you can take it one step at a time rather than, or for example, I love the classic example of like you want to eat a cake one bite at a time rather than the entire cake in one bite, right? So when we get out of the indecision, the overwhelm, the overthinking, and back into the body, it allows us to come back to the task at hand and take it on one bite at a time, one piece at a time, one layer at a time, rather than trying to eat the whole cake at once. So all of these somatic practices that I've talked about today, breath work, shaking, yoga, different body practices like this, there's a whole range of it. And really what is going to be most effective, I find, for my clients is for them to do a little self-discovery. What feels good for them in their body? Try shakings, try some breath work, try some flowy movements such as dance or yoga or hula hooping for me, for example, or whatever lights you up. Think back to when you were a kid. What kind of movement felt good to you? Maybe you liked to run. Maybe you liked to jump rope. Maybe you liked to swim. What was that movement as a kid that you just loved? And then gift yourself a little dose of that movement, at least each week. For example, if you're a swimmer and you don't have access to a pool in your backyard or a lake in your backyard you can swim in every day, maybe you just do once a week at the local pool. Maybe you just take that little bit of time once a week to give yourself the gift of doing something in your body that feels good for you. such as swimming, or maybe you take a dance class once a week. If dance was something you absolutely loved and you did the dance class thing and you just loved dance class so much, give yourself the gift of tuning into your body, getting out of your head and into the body, and allow yourself to come up with a few different practices for this. Perhaps you have the big once a week thing. Maybe you have some other smaller things that you can do in the middle of the workday, in the middle of a meeting, in the middle of a traffic thing, or whatever life throws at you. Maybe you practice by tuning into your breath, taking one breath at a time, allowing yourself to come back to your body one breath at a time, out of indecision, one breath at a time. Allow yourself to cultivate these practices for yourself, and then just give yourself a little bit of this each and every day. Give yourself a little dose of this embodiment each and every day. And then this is literally training our mind to come out of overthinking, out of overwhelm, back into the body naturally. And that's going to allow us, again, to take one step at a time, which allows us to get to where we want to go faster. Because if you're stuck at the bottom of the staircase because you can't jump straight from the bottom all the way to the top, if you're stuck in the bottom of the staircase, you're not going to move at all. Allow yourself to take the one step at a time. And before you know it, you're on the top of the staircase. You've created the goal. You're living the goal. You're living the dream that you've been cultivating, that you've been desiring, that you've been designing for however long. Anyway, I hope that this was helpful. If you have any questions, please let me know. Allow yourself to get out of the mind and into the body, and then take it one step at a time so that you can cultivate your desires, so that you can cultivate a life that lights you up, so that you can cultivate the relationship within yourself that truly feels fulfilling for you. Because, dear, the magic is in you. It's already within you. You just get to tune in, tap in, and turn on the magic each and every day. It's a practice that will continue for literally our entire lifetime. It's a practice we get to do, this tuning and tapping and turning on our magic that we get to do for the rest of our life. It's a beautiful practice. It's an expansive practice. It's a practice of love, compassion, trust, and appreciation for ourselves, for this life, for this breath, for this moment, and for this opportunity to be alive during this time where you and I can connect from thousands of miles away through space and time. Maybe you're listening to this years later. Maybe you're listening to this right now when I release it at the beginning of September in 2024. I'm just so grateful you're here. Wherever you're at, please let me know if this was helpful for you. If this was helpful for you, please rate, review, leave me a little love note, drop into my DMs on Instagram. I would love to hear from you. I'd love to hear your feedback. I want to get better as I'm continuing to grow and expand on this podcast. I'm so excited. I'm going to be having some awesome guests very soon. So stay tuned for the guest episodes, and I will see you all next week in love, light, and so much gratitude. Have a beautiful rest of your day. Peace.